workshop and on impact fee update. If we could please stand for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, staff. I'm sure we'll start with your update.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Keating, Community Development Director, and we're here today for an impact fee workshop.
If we could hold it down in the peanut gallery, no.
We know you're here, Joe.
Thank you, Bob.
As you know, the county's been involved in an impact fee study, actually an impact fee update study, and that's been going on for quite a while. Really, it's been going on over a year and a half now. And in this process, our consultant, Duncan and Associates, prepared a draft impact fee report. We've had several workshops, and because of some concerns and controversy about it, there was a task force put together by the Chamber. So there has been a lot of work that's gone on. There have been a number of meetings, and there's been a lot of discussion regarding the impact fee and impact fee report. At the last workshop that the board had in May, a number of questions came up, and many of these questions related to the traffic impact fee portion of the report. And some of the questions related to how certain traffic characteristics are treated from an impact fee perspective. Some of these issues were trip chaining, when someone leaves one destination and makes several stops before he gets to his final destination. How is that treated from an impact fee perspective? There were some questions regarding some specific types of uses like branch banks, and how are they treated impact fee wise. When a new branch bank opens, how does that affect travel demand, and therefore how are impact fees related to that? And there was a lot of discussion and maybe a concern that commercial uses are charged too high an impact fee compared to residential uses. So at the May workshop, there was a general consensus that it would be a good idea to have a workshop that didn't focus really on the impact fee report and the proposed new impact fee rates, but really was to focus on answering some of the questions that arose at the May workshop. Consequently, staff came to the board at their July 15th meeting and requested authorization to retain a traffic consultant and also extend the contract of our impact fee consultant. And that's what we've done. I want to emphasize that the focus of the workshop today is really to explain how things are done, to answer questions, and hopefully to give everyone a better understanding of how traffic is calculated and how the impact fee rates are derived. Really, the intent on the part of staff or the consultants today is not to go into the impact fee report, not to go into the proposed rates, but again, to discuss the issues and questions that the board had before. So the way it's structured today, the way the agenda is set up, we're going to have a presentation from our impact fee consultant, and that's Clancy Mullen from Duncan and Associates. And after Clancy, we're going to have a presentation by Scott Leftwich of Leftwich Consulting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clancy.
Thanks, Bob. Madam Chair, Commissioners, for the record, Clancy Mullen with Duncan Associates. Can we get that PowerPoint up, Bob? As Bob mentioned, the focus of our joint presentations here today is the non-residential traffic fees. That's really where the issues have been raised. I can't control that from here. I don't think. You need to go ahead and just do the next slide. So we're going to talk about basically three main points, and the first one is what Bob mentioned. First of all, was the pass-by, the drive-through banks, that sort of thing, or those taken into account. And Scott Lethwich is going to address that issue, so I'm not going to dwell on that. The second issue is whether or not proposed fees are the proposed and existing fees, which are high for non-residential relative to residential. And I think this is a misperception. I'd like to kind of put that to rest demonstrate some what other counties are charging. And then the last one is there's a couple of counties have used different methodologies that have resulted in very low fees for non-residential compared to residential. But we think there's some problems with those, and I want to talk about what those are. These charts are addressing the issue of residential versus non-residential fees. The top chart, bar chart, shows fees for a 100,000 square foot shopping center, and these are fees per 1,000 square feet compared to the typical single-family fee. Indian River County is right there in the middle at 1.5. So basically what that means is the fee for 1,000 square feet of retail is 1.5 times the fee of the single-family unit.
Clancy, if I may interrupt, is that the proposed fees or the current fees?
Well, for Indian River County, it's both. They're the same. There's no change.
For commercial, it's the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The ratio did not change. The fees, of course, proposed fees, of course, are much higher for both retail and residential, but the ratio did not change. It's the same.
Okay.
The fees for all the other counties are current fees. So as you can see, pretty much you're right in the middle. Pretty much everybody charges between 1 and 2 times a single-family unit. There's 3 counties that are above 2, Osceola, Martin, and Orange County. There's 2 that are below 1, and everybody else is right in the middle, and you're right in the middle of the pack. So, you know, it would be incorrect to say that your fees charge proportionally more for non-residential, at least when it comes to retail. When you look at office, here we're looking at a 100,000 square foot general office building, you see the same thing. In fact, Indian River County's fees are, if anything, a little bit on the low side compared to the majority of counties in Florida. Once again, as you'll notice, Marion and Pasco have the very lowest fees for office relative to the residential fees. And so I want to talk a little bit about why, you know, what methodologies they used. And let's start with Pasco first, which has the second lowest fees for commercial. The approach that they used is first they used a very standard approach for calculating what the maximum fees that could be charged are. Then they had Fishkind do an analysis, look at the tipping point. This is sort of equivalent to the supply side, you know, economics that we talk about at the national level with tax policy, where, you know, if you raise taxes that pass a certain point, you're going to get less revenue. So for Dr. Fishkind and his firm identified for each land use what they thought that tipping point was. This was based on 2004 data. It was a cross-sectional study. They didn't do a study over time. They looked at one point in time, looked at all the counties, you know, and saw that counties that charged high traffic fees for non-residential had lower growth rates. A lot of concerns have been raised about this study. You know, Collier County, which had the highest road impact fees in Florida at the time, still does. It was shown in that data as having no, I can't remember if it was office or retail growth, when in fact they had in 2004 fairly substantial office and retail growth. So there's some concerns about whether or not that study was accurate, but regardless, what they did is they took the 2 studies and they said, well, we'll charge the lower of the 2. If the tipping point that Fishkind identified is lower than the maximum fees that our impact fee study shows, we'll charge that. So the bottom line is they're charging 100% for residential and some percent less than that, considerably less than that, for retail and office. Having the Fishkind study, it doesn't seem to me, does you really any good in defending that. I would think that, I don't think they've been sued, but I would think that residential developers could argue this isn't fair. We're paying 100% of the freight, and the non-residential guys are paying 50% or 25%, and we're not getting the level of service we're paying for, et cetera, et cetera. So we have concerns about that. If there's the problem with, the fees are no longer proportional to how much traffic you generate, you lose that proportionality, which is really what the Florida courts have said is key to making sure your fees are upheld as valid impact fees and regulatory fees, not as taxes. You can go to the next one. Now, Marion County did a very different approach. They started with the observation that retail tends to follow rooftops. Once the market is there, then you get the retail development. And they basically they took this observation and said, well, that's causality. The residential is causing the retail to come, and therefore causing these trips to occur. And so they hired a firm. They put out an RFP that said, we want to put more of the burden. We think this is true. We want to put more of the burden on residential. And Muni Financial, which is now Willdan, responded to that RFP. They got hired, and they came up with a study to justify it. And what they did is they did some economic analysis, try to estimate what percent of trips to retail development in Marion County comes from residential located in Marion County. And they found they estimated about 65% of those trips come from residential in Marion County. The rest come either from out of county or from other businesses. So they took that 65% of the trips, assigned that to the residential sector. And then they lumped office and business parks with retail in their fee schedule. So basically they're giving office and business parks the same break, although they didn't do any analysis. Their analysis was totally related to retail. Can you go to the next slide? So, the problem with this is that, it's really, there's really not a real strong theory going on here. I mean, there's an observation that in terms of the sequencing of development, retail does tend to follow rooftops, but that, assigning causality is taking that a step further, that the residential is causing the retail to come. The stronger theory, if you want to look at economic theory, would be economic-based theory, which says it's the export sector that causes local growth. Both residential and retail would be essentially the result of the growth of your export sector, which would be things like industry, corporate office headquarters, footloose types of development that doesn't have to be located in Indian River County. Particularly, they could be anywhere. It could also be tourist-oriented retail, which is attracting, outside people to come and spend their dollars that they earned elsewhere, spend it here in Indian River County. Or even retirement housing. Although it's difficult to distinguish, what's retirement housing between what's not retirement housing, but to the extent that you have that sector, that's an export sector. Well, this theory would essentially not charge anything to the residential sector. It would charge everything to the types of industries that your economic development department would like to attract to Indian River County.
You would just impose your impact fees on those that you'd like to have here.
Well, if you wanted to base the fee on the economic base theory, that's what you'd do. So there's different theories out there. The retail follows rooftops is a theory. Once you go down that road, it's very difficult to decide, where to stop. So you've got all these competing theories. The residential people could come in and argue, their theory of, they shouldn't be responsible for any of it. So we don't recommend you go down that path. So that pretty much covers my presentation.
Any questions? We'll start at your end, Commissioner.
Yeah, going back to the Marion County, the retail follows residential. We have like a planned development now, Point West, where they didn't build any commercial until they reached a critical mass of residential because there wasn't residential there to support the commercial sector. And that would seem to follow more of the retail follows the residential. And a lot of times, you talk to manufacturing and businesses and stuff, and one of their criteria is available workforce. A large manufacturer won't move to a new community that doesn't have many people there if they don't think they can find the workforce. They look for where there is a workforce, or schools or education or some type of qualification for the workforce, and then they say, okay, well, we think that's a good location, and they look at other factors. But, an available workforce seems to, so I'm not real sure the economic theory here is real viable, but, and I saw some examples that Mr. Leftwich will use is we have a lot of growth in South County. At the time, there was no retail or commercial there, but we approved those projects. The traffic is in on the roads, and then, okay, if a bank or a fast food or something goes in close to that, the retail did follow the residential. And so, in my mind, I think that needs to be looked at a little bit more, because, and so, a lot of those things, like a Home Depot doesn't come in until there's a demographic base to justify a large box store like that. So it seems the residential does come for, and this whole county was that way. For years, the big complaint here was, well, we have all these houses here and there's nothing to do and zero beach. And then finally, when we hit a critical residential demographic level, then, a big mall came in, and then the fast food chains came in, and the big box warehouse stores came in. But those all didn't come in first, and they said, we hope we draw a bunch of people here to keep the doors open. They waited till there was a critical mass, and then they came in. So, and I guess it goes back to the question too for the retail shopping center. Why are we at 1.5 times the residential? Why aren't we at 1? Or, if we're going to make it fair, why is it at 1.5 on the shopping center on commercial?
Well, it just worked out that way that office is at 1-to-1. Retail generates more traffic than office. It also generates more traffic than 1,000 square feet of retail generates more traffic than a single family home. So that's why it's more than a 1-to-1.
Okay, but again, that goes back to my concern is that shopping center isn't going to go in until that residential development is there, so they have enough of a customer base to keep the doors open. So I don't think the shopping center is generating the traffic. I think it's capturing the traffic that's going to be on the road, whether, when you buy a house and move here, you're going to go to the grocery store, you're going to go to the gas station, you're going to go to the bank, you're going to make all those trips. And in my mind, people aren't going to live without going to the grocery store. So it seems as soon as we approve a residential development, we know at some point we have to approve commercial to support it. So again, I'm not sure why we're charging them 50% more.
And with that in mind, you said because there's more traffic with a commercial development. How many trips originate from a commercial development? I believe that I could do a study that would support that trips originate from residential units, not from commercial developments. And I'm not an engineer and don't work for any firm like y'all do, but I believe I could come up with a study that proves that. And really, where I'm going with this, right now, and I'm trying to take the economic conditions out of it, but I'm really having a hard time doing that. Right now, it defies logic to be even talking about raising them. It would really be a stimulating conversation about how are we going to lower them. That's really where I'd like to see us go with this versus what we're doing right now. But with that being said, I think that we've got a strong consensus up here on the board that our commercial and industrial and office impact fees are those that are, in my opinion, hampering the kind of growth in this community that creates jobs, creates a tax base that isn't protected with Save Our Homes, that generates sales tax. We are, the way I feel is I feel like we're killing what we want the most. And I appreciate y'all defending the study here, and I know this might become a little bit
out of left field, but I'd almost like for y'all to create a study that helps us do what we want to do so we can justify it.
Well, we certainly, I think, had tried to do that. I mean, we certainly had an open mind about it and looking at these other studies. But, you know, you can certainly make the argument, you know, the retail follows rooftops argument. You know, and there's a certain intuitive appeal. You know, but then of course you have other competing theories out there. It's like, well, the retail follows the rooftop certainly sequentially, but what brings the people here in the first place? You know, people aren't going to live here if there aren't jobs. So if you get an industry that comes in, it's hard to argue that the industry is just following the people. I mean, the industry is going to, you know, if there's an industry here that's creating jobs, people are going to come. I mean, that's pretty well demonstrated. Yes, I mean, there's got to be some, they're not going to move to a place where there's no people. But they certainly don't need to have, you know, everybody, you know, unemployed and without jobs when they move there. They're not going to move to a place with high unemployment. They're going to move to a place that, you know, has amenities and has, you know, depending on the type of employee they want to move there. But people are pretty mobile. I mean, if there's a job, people are there. If there's a good job, people will move, will follow it. So,
Peter, do you have any other questions?
No. Well, we'll move on.
Next.
I'll reserve for later, but I just wanted to add that I believe what you're saying is this is rhetorically based, and that the system at best is opinionated or selective, and at this point in this juncture, I can't eliminate the economy of scale, and the challenges that we're confronted with now. I believe we're in the wrong place at the wrong time and the wrong explanation. But with that said, you've done a lot of work, and you were directed to do a lot of work. And this study is how long? When did it start?
about a year and a half.
A year and a half ago. A lot of things have changed. And I believe that no matter what we do throughout these discussions, we're going to have errant information that can only be misapplied to a challenging and struggled environment and an economy that will not make it through based on year and a half to 2-year-old study and information that might have been based on an errant study from years past that this was founded upon. And again, I don't mean it to be a negative statement, although it did sound a bit negative. I have to look at the positive end and what we're going to do for the future of the county. I don't believe that all retail is created equal, and I don't believe that all commercial is created equal, and I believe that those two areas do not bear the same burden upon the community, and I don't believe that you can fairly assess on what one establishment is going to do for the rest of the community and the rooftops that exist at the time of application.
Will, did you want to
Yeah, on your
get in here?
Pasco County fish kind analysis, it talks about optimizing revenue for each land use. And it's not clear to me what kind of revenue they're trying to optimize. Is it impact fee revenue, such that if you raise the fees too high, people just won't build and your revenue falls, and if you lower them too much, you get more building?
Right, that's the argument.
It's not the tax base that they're looking at developing.
No, they were looking at strictly impact fee revenue.
I think Commissioner Whip had something on this.
Did you?
Yeah, I'll make my comments now instead of saving them. Anyway, looking at this, if you look at the history, and just common sense, not an engineer or a consultant, but, you know, you went back 200 years ago, a farmer that was self-sufficient may have moved into an area where he could live on the land, and then he hired somebody. And then other people came there, and then pretty soon you needed somebody to open a store so the people that weren't self-sufficient had someplace to go and buy what they needed. And then because the store was there, then some other people moved in, and for the jobs that maybe the store created and the spin-off from that. I think that's exactly what happened in this county 150 years ago or 120 years ago. So I think that the business follows rooftops, but then at some point in time, people follow the businesses because there's potential for employment. But I agree with what Wesley said. I just have a problem. We charge impact fees on residential properties, and this has been a problem that I haven't understood since the beginning of all of this, even back to the original several years ago. I see, when people pay impact fees for residential, the businesses wouldn't be here and wouldn't create any traffic if the residential wasn't here. The parking lots would be empty and the stores would be empty. And so I have, it's just it goes on that I just can't get it in my head why we have such high fees for industry here that not only creates jobs and there may be some justification to that, I'm not sure, but when you come to the service industry, the stores, doctor's offices, fast food places, they're here because the population was here to support them. And then we charge them a lot to be here when they go to build a building. And that's one of the, I'm for impact fees. I think impact fees are important, and I think people should pay their way. But I just question how equitable they are when we question, when we charge the business people that are providing a service that's demanded by the homeowner that lives here, the resident.
And in addition to that, and one thing that I think really makes Indian River County just a little bit different as far as the typical demographics, the number of people that are moving to this community for the jobs, I don't think that's very high. And I don't mean that sarcastically, but I do mean that there's a lot of people in this community that are here with an entitled income. And when I say entitled income, I'm going to call it just mailbox money. That is, regardless of what happens, on the 10th of every month, they get that check from somewhere. And so, therefore, the demographics of this community is a lot different than St. Lucie County and a lot different than Brevard County. And whenever again, I would almost, and I mean this as sincerely as I possibly can, if I could give you the answer of where I want the impact fees, then you could come up with a study that would make me happy with it. But I just like Commissioner Wheeler said, I mean, we're trying to get jobs here for the people that are here with substandard and service industry. I'm going to call it service industry jobs. We're trying Piper, for example, and raising the impact fees right now on something like this that we have provided a financial incentive for Piper to be here, that we're charging ourselves on a per 1,000 square foot. It's a vicious cycle to me that's going nowhere. It's like being in a hamster cage.
I guess just almost a sentence to sum up where I'm at. I just think that most of government, not all of it, but most of government services are demanded by the residents, not by the businesses. Obviously, when businesses are robbed or employees have problems, that calls into law enforcement, or somebody has a heart attack at a store, an employee, obviously, they have some impact. But the main impact on any community, I believe, is the residential part and providing that service.
Well, now that you've heard the guys, let's move on to the traffic consultant.
I'm not sure I'm ready.
Oh, you should have been here yesterday. We were here till 4:06. Yeah.
No. That's right. I'm Scott Leftwich Consulting Engineers. I have Arturo Perez with me here today. We were asked to look at some issues related to traffic and to look back at those issues as to how an impact fee is taken into account. And that's what we are going to do today, and hopefully explain some information. We may cause more questions, but hopefully we'll be able to explain some information. And the first thing we'll talk about is, and a lot of this you've already gone over, because I know y'all are very well versed in this. If you've been doing this a year and a half, you've heard a lot of things and a lot of different rates and procedures. And of course you have an improvement type procedure and you have a consumption. You have a consumption based, and that's what we're going over today, to look at consumption based, impact fee theory, to look at the fees charged or charged in new development based on the roadway capacity consumed for that new development, different than impact that you would have approach. The existing roadway deficiencies are not charged to the new development, and that's important. The fees determined from cost to add 1 vehicle mile of roadway capacity. We'll have examples and show how that works. The needed improvements are based on your long-range transportation plan that you have developed. This is just a simple chart here to show you how the capacity consumed by the proposed land use, and how, if you have a new residence, the impact fee is paid for a shared cost of that capacity. That's basically what you have. Next. And your impact fee calculation is pretty straightforward, that you have whatever the cost is minus the credits. We're not going to go into details of the credits, but the cost relates to the capacity needed to new development and is calculated as the vehicle miles of travel. We'll go over that times the unit cost divided by the capacity per lane. And that's been well documented in your studies that you've done. The credits, again, is to ensure there's not double charging for gas tax, sales tax, etc. The vehicle miles of travel is equal to a trip rate, and this is what y'all been talking about, is a trip rate. And it's one of the concepts that you have here is what is the trip rate times the percent of new trip. That's the other factor we talk about. What's the new trip that's on the roadway, and what's the average trip length that you have. And we'll go into each one of those. You divide those by 2 because you have 2 trips, one coming in and one going out. And this is what you have, the trip rate that you have. For a single family, you have classifications. One of them is greater than 2,500 square foot. 10.74, I don't know if the car is about 0.74, but that would try to get 10.74 cars. That's what you have. That's usually split half and half, half coming in, half going out. There's where your trips are generated from. Next. Then we look at the percent new trips. The percent new trips, we have 2 graphs down at the bottom, or 2 charts to look at, or figures. And one is on, you have a proposed project there on the left-hand side. And you have background trips. Those are trips that are already out there. Then you have background future passerby trips. They're already there, and if you have a new development, just as y'all been talking about, they will go into that new development. They should be taken into account as far as turning into an alley development, but they shouldn't be charged for what's on the roadway. That makes sense. Now, what happens after that particular project is constructed? You have the background trips, you have the passerby trips that are background, then you have the new trips. And that's where I talk about the new trips that are coming to and from that particular
I've got a question on
land
that,
use.
Madam Chair. I can't.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's look at the orange square, where the paint car is going into the orange square. Now that development is there. In the past, with the development not there, which is where the pink square is, it was the purple car that had to go to that same development. We'll go ahead and just call that the Home Depot, just for color coordination here.
Okay.
And they're pulling into the Home Depot, but instead that Home Depot wasn't there, so therefore they're going to go in on the purple car, and they're going to go from here to, before our Home Depot was here, St. Lucie County, all the way to Okeechobee Road in St. Lucie County to the Home Depot. So according to what you just told me with the trips and all that kind of stuff, other than the driveway going in, again, if y'all would let me make this study, I could tell you why we'd have to pay the Home Depot to be here.
That's one way to look at it.
Or you could go down to your local hardware store that the owner, grew up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just saying that that is my at least that is how I see that commercial development in fact saves trips. And I mean, so now tell me, if that car was the purple car turning in, I mean, what about the other trips truly where the purple car did not go in? I wish I had a pointer right now. It'd be easier for me to do this, but it just saved me trips. It just saved that car from having to go anywhere.
Yes, sir. The purple trip, we don't count those on passerby if they're on the same link.
But it wouldn't be a passerby. It's going to a destination from the house to the Home Depot. I would not call it just a passerby. I would call that a trip, heading somewhere.
It is a trip, but we also call it a passerby, and I'll go through the different examples of those also as we go back. But that's just a passerby. We're saying the only new trips that are there are, in this case, the red car that's there.
Okay.
Being charged, right. And these are the primary trip types. And what we did is we borrowed this from the Institute of Transportation Engineers because we have to have trip rates. Trip rates are what we as traffic engineers operate off of. There's different ways to do trip rates. You mentioned St. Lucie County. We did some work there for St. Lucie County. We've done it for Osceola County. And in Osceola County, they had some questions also, and we actually did some trip rates for some banks and daycares because they said that it's different here in Osceola County than it is in other counties. And we did find the trip rates were somewhat different there overall. Some were higher, some were lower, some of the average trip length was higher, some was lower, but overall the rates come out a little bit less. But that substantiated some of what you were talking about due to the different types of land use coming in. But if we look at the first primary trip, we have a vehicle miles of travel of 10 miles. We just use that as an example. It's going to an office or any type of land use there. It's going straight to work, home to work that you have. The second trip is going, as we mentioned, and we have a bank here where we call it a capture trip or a passerby. That trip, again, no VMT is added. It's going straight off the main road. the VMT, and we take out the passerby. And again, the only part of the trip that you account for is the turns that are there. Now, the third type of trip on the bottom is a diverted trip. And notice the VMT is longer there because you're going to the bank and you have to divert off your major route to go to the bank. That's if you're on 60 and you're coming in, you're diverting off on another side street, and you have to go to the bank. And you have to turn around and you're going back to 60 because that's what the route you wanted to be on. So not only do you have the primary trip length, but you have the total VMT of 18 that's taken into account.
Wait, please.
Yes, sir.
Tell me how you got to 18 again?
4 miles off to the bank, 4 miles back, 10 miles length, 8, 4 plus 4 plus 10 is equal to 18.
Can I tell you how you'd get to 9?
Go for it.
3 times 3. I mean, again, this goes back to my study. Yeah, and move to the bank or something like that, or if the Press Journal had their way, we'd just live on top of the bank, and then therefore there wouldn't be any, anything there as far as the trips at all. But I just, again, this doesn't help me. What you just said doesn't help me in my mind with how the commercial facilities, in fact, can and should, in my opinion, reduce traffic.
Okay, let's keep going. We got the trips, we got the chaining of trips. And when I get through, you may say, like I said, it may cause more questions. You may disagree with the traffic theory. We're just going over traffic theories that are out there. And another way to do it, if you take your impact fees off of some of your commercial and retail and put them back on the houses, all you're doing is just charging one more for one that you take off, because you have to have the same balance at the end of the day. In other words, the same amount if you want to come back in and pay for that mile of roadway.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
With your trip type examples, primary and diverted and secondary and pass by captured, I just want to give you a direct analysis. When I first relocated here in the town, I was here in Indian River County, and there was a few hardware stores nearby, but I needed something of larger dynamics. So I had to drive to the town of Melbourne on 192, where there was an orange box type home improvement store. I was driving to that location, making the trip through the same local streets and returning back with the same product. Forgive me for being elementary. I now have the option of going into Sebastian, where one of those orange stores has now been located, or I can now go to 58th Avenue, State Road 60, where another orange store is also located for my convenience. What burden, what additional burden am I placing? What additional burden are they placing for me as a consumer, or directly for the citizens by existing? As a matter of fact, they're cutting the trips. So I want to know how these primary examples can apply to justify an increase in impact and an expense.
Well, to me, that brings, well, no, but the point there is we can talk about a local service like a bank or a regional draw like a Home Depot. And the answer there is all the folks in Barefoot Bay that might have been driving to Melbourne are now driving into our county. So that's a regional draw as compared to a local neighborhood commercial service.
Well, that just defies common sense when gasoline is about $4 a gallon, that they would want to come down to us when they have their own, doesn't it?
Barefoot Bay? They don't have their own.
No, I mean, no, they're
could
up
we
in
just
Sebastian.
roll through this and hold your questions?
I
and,
did have a question, though.
No, and hold this until Mike will be answering some of your questions as he goes through.
I'll
and
try
then
to
we'll
answer
open it up to the
what
public, and then
questions I
we'll really
can.
have at it.
You want to respond?
Would that be addressed in the percent new trips? I mean, in the presentation here, it says that non-residential building types have a between 23 and 94% new trips. Isn't that something that's calculated?
We do. That's addressed in the surveys, and we have a survey chart in here.
Because of the newness of the business, there'll be much more of a draw?
Well, not more the newness of the business, but the business out there, because when you do the survey, and all this is based on the surveys, and there were some surveys done in Indian River, there were some surveys taken by your consultant 4 years ago, it was Tyndall Oliver, and some of theirs was based on their base of surveys, in other words, the surveys they've done around the states and other areas, and some they did do in Indian River. They take those surveys, and that's what amounts to the amount of your new trips, which amounts to your any passerby trips you have, which relates to the traffic trip rate that you have out there. These are the standard types of trips that you have. And the reason that we brought these up are once they do the surveys, the people doing the surveys look at these for determining what something's a passerby, a diverted, or secondary. And basically, primary trips is diverted trip and secondary, and the secondary is just by definition. That's all. So you still get those trips out there.
I'm just trying to get the graphic hypothetical resolution in comparison to actually what I have physically experienced, and many of us have. I think there's not too many people in the room that haven't been up to Melbourne before we had our own Home Depots.
If that trip was a common trip that was taken, it should have been accounted for in the surveys. And as I mentioned earlier, if that is something this commission desires for surveys, to look at specific land use types here that may be different, to look at shorter trip lengths, or in your case that was a longer trip length that would take into account. You'd want to take surveys to account for that. New surveys.
From a personal experience, before there was a Home Depot here, I drove to Ace Hardware and it was about 3/4 of a mile. Now I drive 2 miles to Home Depot.
Would you want to continue, please?
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Next, please.
Well, more travel. Not always more travel.
Okay, this is a survey form that I was talking about. In the surveys, when surveys are taken, they look at the type of trip, of course the day of the trip, if you have weather, anything that's taken into account for that trip, where the trip's origin is from, the nearest intersection to that origin, the length that they're there, the next destination, and the intersection next destination. I know this is getting a lot of information, but what they do is they take all that information and they put it back into the 4 trip types that we had before to look at primary or passerby trips, because they want to determine if there's a new trip out there. And we'll look at some examples of that next. So what happens if we're looking at an average trip length? For each development activity, average trip length in miles is determined based on Indian River County, as I mentioned, or other Florida studies. Each land use has a different average trip length that accounts for to and from, and this gives you a single family dwelling unit of 4.42 miles, either going to shop, food, or industry. Next. So what happens? Again, this is a slide you saw before, the total system capacity that's used, the amount of capacity consumed. You want the impact fee to pay for that. And how do we do that? Next. Now we're putting the amount of money. The daily system capacity was determined by Duncan at 75, 60 vehicle lanes, and approximate cost that you have here around $4 million per lane mile. So looking at that, we can go through the calculations to determine from the daily VMT per square footage of dwelling units, it takes about 320 homes to pay for that 1 lane mile capacity. That's the way it relates that you have. Next. Back.
How did you come up with the lane mile, or are we just going on Duncan and Associates? That's what they said, so we didn't go back and re-examine the lane mile cost.
What, the 7560?
The 4.2 million.
The $4 million per lane mile?
Yeah.
That's what we were given.
Okay.
No, during this study, we did recalculate the average cost for a lane mile, and we used recent construction projects, right-of-way acquisition costs, and we looked at the projects that we have programmed in the long-range transportation plan. But yes, the cost per lane mile was calculated for this study. It's not the same cost that was used in the Duncan study.
Is it, did it go up or down?
Oh, it went up. it went up significantly.
That's why the study being a year and a half old leaves it as a dated study, because right now our costs, when we did this, the information we used at the time, a year and a half ago, the costs were a lot higher. Now with the slow economy, our costs per lane mile are down, and so the study just being dated a year and a half, the numbers have changed.
Okay, next. This gives you some of your information for a single family greater than 2,500 square feet, retail, again, greater than 200,000 square feet, general industry. We have the ITE codes, Institute of Transportation Engineer codes, the daily trip rates, the percent of new trips. Notice for retail, you're at 75% on that particular classification of greater than 200,000 square foot. For general industry, it's 92%. Trip links for each one, and a traffic impact fee was the latest that's out there. Next. Now we want to go through a trip chaining example where you go from home to daycare to bank and back to home. We've given the miles for that. This is from Falcons Trace up 27th Avenue, down 60th into daycare. Early education. I have not driven out this route, by the way. We wanted specific examples because I thought that would be the next question. Did I personally? No, I did not. Okay. Back to the bank on US 1, and from the bank back to home in Falcons Trace. So we have the distance on each one of those. So let's look at the next slide to see on the trip chaining as we go back. We have a primary trip to the daycare, then you have a diverted trip to the bank, back to the home. Now the way that this works is, if you look on the right side, from the home you have the amount of trips and percent new trips. This is all again based on surveys. So if you have more passerby, it's taken off. Okay? Those are not put on here. So from the home you have 2 trips, you have 100% of the new trips are there. You have a trip length of 5.45. Part of that trip length is coming from home to daycare, part of it's from bank to home. When you get to daycare, again, in this particular example, it's 100% of new trips. The trip length, again, is 5.2. That's split between from daycare to home and from daycare to bank. Then when you go from daycare to bank, again, you have that trip length that's split for the bank of each way of 4.25, part from the bank to daycare and part from the bank to home. So the total VMT is 14.9. Each land use takes into account because you either have 100% or you have, in this case, 100% new trips.
That's probably the best graphic there that, as far as, I mean, like Commissioner Wheeler said, if you take the home out of that, then you have no trips to the daycare or the bank. And if you take the daycare out of that, that's in that loop, and move it further away, then the daycare has, in fact, not being there and being further away, has added trips, or is a longer trip because it's not as close. So, I mean, that's a whole lot easier than what I was trying to say with the truck. Just take any of those out of the loop, and you can see how that affects the traffic. And by adding those daycare and the bank to it, I submit that it shortens traffic generation and vehicle miles.
Bob, can we go back one slide? Can you use your arrow and point about where Oslo Road is on 27th Avenue? Okay. So now, if we put a bank and a daycare there, we just took 6, 4, 10, we just took 20 miles off that trip.
Yes, sir.
So wouldn't, and when you say residential, it's 10.74 daily trips. Somewhere in there that includes a trip to the bank and a trip to school and a trip to work and a trip to the grocery store, all those trips, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if we put 400 new homes down in Falcon Trace, we know they got to go to a bank somewhere. They're going to a retail shop somewhere, and currently they got to go 6 miles one way and then an 8-mile trip coming back the other. If we stick a bank right down there within 4 miles of all those homes, it should be 100% bypass capture. I don't know why we would charge them new impact, new road use when we got all those people there. We know they got to go to a bank somewhere, and now we're putting one they can almost walk to. Why are we hitting them for impact fees?
And all I can tell you is you probably want to consider I don't like to ask people to do surveys because they're costly, okay? To do some surveys. We did the same thing for Osceola County. To give you an example, and that's what I had Arturo pull up. We had before, they had 53% new trips. We did surveys, and the survey was 26%. Their rate before was trip rate was 27.3, and after was 11.9. So by the surveys, this is Osceola County, not Indian River. So all I'm saying, if that is a concern, because that has already been taken into account into the survey information, and it's been applied appropriately to get the rates that you have. If you think those rates or links are different, such as examples you've given, and they have to be averaged for the whole county now, because you're going to take that information, not that one example, but other examples also, to average it, then it could bring that down. Yes, sir.
But let me make a couple points. One of the ways we can reduce impact fees and reduce trip lengths is doing better land use planning. If we have commercial uses, service uses, retail uses closer to where people live, we can reduce trip lengths, reduce vehicle miles traveled on the road, reduce the need for infrastructure, and reduce impact fees. But let me tell you one other thing too, and Scott can maybe expand on this. When we do traffic analyses, when we do studies, what we're trying to do is predict human behavior. People don't automatically go to the closest daycare. They're going to look at the quality of the daycare. They're going to look at a number of other characteristics. And the same thing with the bank. What you've got is you're assuming rational behavior from people, and rationally, which is
we had a long meeting yesterday, Bob. I know what you're talking about.
But anyhow, I just want to point that out. Just because there is a daycare and a bank right beside someone where that person can walk to it doesn't mean that he's going to go to it. And if you look out there, I know there's been a lot of discussion about reducing number of trips or trip lengths when you put in additional facilities. But the bottom line is traffic keeps increasing out there, even when we do densify with banks and services. And that's what we're trying to reflect in the impact fee study and in these formulas and the methodology that's there.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we do a lot of large developments, and what we try to do is exactly what you said, internalize as much traffic as we can, get as many jobs. Everything you said is correct. We try to get as many jobs, because we're doing developments that have 10,000, 15, 20, we were. Right now they're all on hold, but as you do that, we try to do that. We want to internalize, yeah. Okay, next we have some more examples. Here's you're going straight to work and you're going to shop. Again, we give a work at what's this, Piper Aircraft, again from Falcon Trace, Oslo Square, where you're going to shop and then back to home. Again, let's look at our trip chaining on our example on the next slide. Again, you have the primary trip to work, then, from home to work, then you have a primary trip with a secondary trip to the shopping center. If you have a use within the shopping center, it's taken off because that's an internal trip like you were saying. Okay, should be an intra trip or internal trip within that shopping center. And then you're going from the shop back to home. So this gives you the work trips that you have. So in this case, we're taking into account if it is someone that's going to the grocery or fast food, whatever it be, McDonald's, Wendy's, I don't want to, name them all, but whatever, you go back, you drop off, that's in the shop. We all do that. That's taken off. Then you only take the major trip you had, and again, this is summed up the same way that you had before. And we have one more example. Again, very simple, home to the bank. We've already talked about if you have a closer bank here, again, it's 4.5 miles. If we go to the next slide, you can see where you're going just a primary trip and a return home that you have. Again, we've already stated if you have a closer bank, but you would have to look at all the factors. You take the surveys, and people's choices would come in on the surveys you would have and be taken into account for those types of trips. Now, those basically, we have one other slide that I want to just sum up. Each land use we have, according to the way the procedure has been done, is responsible for the proportion of the trips to and from allocated to that land use. Every trip must be accounted for. land uses with lower percent new trips, that's higher passerby, or we call them capture rates also, result in a lower VMT, therefore lower impact fee. So that's the way we take it into account. No land uses can be excluded from paying fees without adding expenses to other land uses unless you so desire as commission to do that. That's just, I'm a traffic engineer. That's all I am.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Wheeler, you want to start at your end and start the round robin questions?
No, I'm just thinking that, I'm wondering too, I know we can put anything together when you get engineers and consultants, and I mean, you can take just about anything you want, make it go wherever you want to go, but I'm just wondering, just like in our residential impact fees, for instance, we have, I think, 3 different fees based on square footage of the house. And I think primarily that's done because if a smaller house can't afford what a bigger house can afford for...
No, not based on that.
Well...
You're right on the fees.
It was said that
Yeah.
when I asked the question.
Actually, it was done based on studies out there that show smaller houses have fewer numbers of trips, and those fewer number of trips were interpolated to get the lower rates for smaller houses.
I think what Commissioner Wheeler's saying, though, we used to have 1, and we were asked to look at 3 to help reduce it, and one of the reasons was for affordable housing.
Right.
And you can build any model you want.
Yeah, and that's one of the question with commercial or industrial, but particularly commercial, because most of the commercial, unless it's a big box store or an outlet mall or something that's a regional shopping plaza, take that out of the picture, and all the rest of the commercial, quite frankly, I think the majority of it is a service industry for the community. And I'm just wondering if we aren't putting, and it's a question, but if we're not putting more burden on the commercial because they think they can, or you think they can better afford it. You know, it's kind of like, I think almost any tax we pay in this country is based on primarily one's ability to pay and then coming up with a reason to charge that.
Oh, that's good.
If I could just say...
I'll write that down.
No, I'm fixing to build on it.
The big difference is this is a fee, not a tax. And it can't be based...
That was a good one, Bob. That was a good one.
Let me rephrase that and say that fees and taxes are based on one's ability to pay.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Bob. And I didn't mean to laugh so loud on Bob.
And I just want to say, because it's a fee, the amount of the fee has to be directly proportional to the benefit that the fee payer receives.
Yeah,
so there really needs to be based on studies and documented numbers.
But you can create that. Government's great at creating those things.
And not to fault anybody.
No, I think it's just factual.
If you were finished, I don't know if you were.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yes, Madam Chair. Bob, I think I look at when we last raised the impact fees, and that was about, was that 05?
2005, yes.
In 2005, that's when we did it. And we did that to try to have growth pay its own way. That was the drum that was resonating at the time. And then whenever we did that to try to have growth pay its own way, and then allegedly to try to keep taxes lower. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but that didn't happen. You can go back to our taxes in 05, and then and as the impact fees were in place, taxes still went up. And it kind of goes on what Commissioner Wheeler's talking about to a certain extent, that I believe that as a government, it could be like a cancer, and there is no amount to satisfy what we think we need. And so looking at this, and where I'd like to ultimately wind up with this, I'd like to reduce them on commercial and industrial, not increase them on residential, not shift the burden, and particularly those that are going to create some decent paying jobs in this community. And if we wanted to go after targeted industry of some kind, as we have we have a plan to do so, that's really where I'd like to wind up with this. And again, if you'd let me do the study, I could make it work. Just like we give us how much money we've got to have, and we do the study to make it work.
I think we have to be careful. First of all, we do not do any of our capital needs through ad valorem taxes. The reason ad valorem taxes went up on that chart you saw from the president was 2 voted GO bond issues as the main part of it. The third part was the jail opening, which is operating cost. Impact fees are capital. We do not get any. But I think you are correct. If the commission so wishes to try and get less money, I think you're best to pick a percentage overall that you're going to collect. You're going to look at it with your eyes open. If you were to collect 100% of your needed money from impact fees, you're going to need this level. You can say, okay, we're only going to get 80% of that money. That would be a safer way of doing it, because you have made that conscious decision across the board to reduce your reliance on impact fees. However, you do have to realize that you may have a shortfall. We would have never been in this impact fee situation if the school board staff would have never gone through this exercise if the school board hadn't required it to be in our ordinance.
Well,
at that time we were in a fix, but and now that we've gone through it, it's a dated study. Staff is not recommending using the study or increasing at this time. However, I think when you look at these traffic models, you have to be very careful, because if we do get sued by, you might reduce commercial, but you might get sued by a residential developer out there. You've got to be able to justify yourself.
Assuming they can afford an attorney right now.
Yeah, I mean, but you could also reduce all impact fees. That is a choice this commission can make.
But whenever I look at I believe that the philosophical question, the debate is always, should growth pay its own way? Well, is that really the question? The question, in my opinion, that should be asked, does no growth pay its own way? And then whenever we're looking at it from that standpoint in the community right now, we're starting to really feel like we understand what no growth is in this community. And I think that's quite frankly why there's so many people out here today. It's probably because they don't have time. It's not that they don't have things to do. It's just probably they don't have the work to do it. And they're concerned about what this is going to do. And in fact, I do believe in the supply side. That was the one thing that I really do agree with you on. But I believe that in fact, raising impact fees, taxes, rates, whatever we want to call it, I believe in fact that can generate less revenue. And particularly whenever you're talking about it in the commercial or in the industrial fashion, whenever you have people that move into this community, they pay their impact fee on their house, then they go and start opening up a business. We know the small businessman's the backbone of this community. We know they're the ones that generate the jobs and that we all really need so bad in here. And I just really feel like that with the fees not only that we have in place, but especially where we were talking about going with them, is just about in the wrong direction as north and south.
I mean, I'd just like to respond to some of that. I agree with the comments that Wesley made. I'd like to lower fees and not raise fees, so on and so forth, but I don't think that's possible in the real world, because somebody's got to pay the bills for the growth in the streets and the infrastructure that we need. So it's not a case of taking away from something and just not raising anything. The bill's going to come due at the end of the year, and somebody's got to pay it, and the money's going to come from someplace. And we're not paying 80% of our impact fees. We're paying about 50% of the impact with impact fees. The other 50% comes from gas tax and 1 cent optional sales tax. So there's about a 50% reduction off the top if you want to look at just the impact fee for generally. And so you're going to shift the burden as much as you don't want to, or you're going to quit building infrastructure. And then at some point in time, you're going to have a serious problem trying to play catch up again. A lot of large cities have run into this, like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, because they didn't want to raise the fee. And then they've got to go back in and they're spending millions on fixing infrastructure that did damage when it busted, so they had even additional costs. And we aren't there, but we've got to be careful. You have to decide what do you want for infrastructure, how do you want to build it, and how are you going to pay for it. And the problem it's how do you want to pay for it? That's the real question. You want to pay for it with property taxes? You want to pay for it with impact fees, gas tax, sales tax, whatever. But you've got to decide how you're going to pay for it.
Madam Chair, I don't agree fundamentally with the pretense that was laid out. And because half of our roads or infrastructure is paid with gas tax and sales tax, to me, the economic engine that creates more gas tax and sales tax is what we're trying to increase the fee of. And I do believe, the impact fees on, and I do believe that if we were to reduce the impact fees on commercial and industrial, it would we would generate more sales tax, and we'd generate more jobs and things in this community that actually contribute to the economic base. I don't believe that those numbers are static. I don't believe that if you reduce impact fees by $1, that sales tax or any other those that are generated in the business world do not increase at all. I just don't believe that premise.
Well, you're entitled to your beliefs.
Well, Reagan was right on that too.
Anybody down here have any other beliefs?
And I also believe, just to follow up on that the pretense of treating the impact as a vacuum, most certainly as the impacts do arrive, they also share their burden by paying the taxes and paying the gas tax, and they're actually part and parcel to the process. We're separating the pots and defining the pots in different ways, just to justify what we do with impacts. In other words, they bring their impact, but they also pay for their impact because they're buying gas. The folks that come in with the new businesses, the folks that have come in with the new rooftops are not in a vacuum. They're not contributing, not contributing to our community. And they're not partaking in some of the taxation. A county that has the lowest millage rate in the state, I believe. Is that confirmed, Joe? Joe?
Yes, we have the lowest, we think we will have the lowest general fund tax rate in the state. That the one that was the lowest went up 15% and we didn't go up. So we believe we will have the lowest one in the state this year in the general fund.
So as one was saying, common sense. Well, it defies common sense. I'm still trying to get a clear picture of the Home Depot concept, those two stores, where now I am making a far more shorter trip to the same establishment that I would be going to, the identical establishment. And I believe that where it was refuted about the bank, then the bank conversation came right back into it's all about a preference. Do I want to choose a different bank? Well, then if I choose a different bank, then I choose the price of having to travel and burden the roadways. And yes, the new business should bear that fact because they're creating this burden. I go along with that to the point of if we had no options. But quite frankly, with the economy the way it is right now, I think things have changed in a year and a half to 2 years. And I contend, I don't want to hang on the laurels of the price of gas, which has affected every consumable that we use in this county and every other county across the great nation. Those trips have changed. People are making choices. They're switching banks. They're doing anything they can to cut out the gas cost. And I don't see how we can place that factor into our concern for the county.
Peter?
Yeah, I'll go back to the Home Depot real quick. I think the difference here is you have people in Barefoot Bay, which is out of our county, that will now drive into our county because the Home Depot is there. Just like you and Sebastian used to drive from Sebastian to Melbourne, Barefoot Bay would drive from Barefoot Bay to Melbourne. We put a Home Depot in Sebastian. The people in Barefoot Bay will now drive into our county. Those are new trips on our roads. I think that's different than the local bank. And I do want to go back to the bank thing because, you know, I keep going back. In those 10.74 daily trips is a trip to the bank, okay, somewhere in there. We approved 400 new homes down in Falcon Trace. All 400 homes are going to go to a bank somewhere, okay, because we agree it's in the 10.74. If we put a new bank in there close, they may not get, say those 400 homes, 25% go to Bank A, 25 to B, C, and D. It's evenly distributed around the county. They may not get all 25% of Bank A people because maybe some of the people like Bank A on 60. They like the tellers there. But they may get a few folks from Bank B. They may bring in a few folks from Bank C and some other folks from Bank D to make their business. But all those people were still going to a bank somewhere. I don't see a single new trip in there. All 400 homes had to go to a bank. We agree it's in the 10.74 And before the new bank went in, they had to travel somewhere. They're still out there, but they're making a shorter trip. And I don't see how that's a new mile traveled. I just can't see how that's a new mile. And then my other point is, you know, I know we're not talking about the dollars and the impact fees and stuff, but it's already been discussed and stuff. But when we look at drivers of the economy and people moving here, people do call and they say, well, what is the local taxes in that county? And they're usually talking about what the property tax rate is. I don't think any realtor here, you can tell me, but does anybody call up when they're looking to buy a house here, they say, hey, by the way, what's the impact fee on that house I'm looking at? No. They say, what's the purchase price and what are the property taxes on it? Okay? That's what they look at, is property taxes. And as we just covered, we have probably the lowest general fund millage rate, the lowest general fund property tax rate in the state of Florida. So somebody calls up and says, well, what's the cost of living in your county? The realtors, y'all should be banging that drum. So we have one of the lowest millage rates in the state of Florida. And they're not going to ask, well, what was the impact fee on the house I'm buying? They don't ask that.
They ask that when it's too
Don't know
late.
what it is.
Exactly.
They don't have impact fees elsewhere like that.
No, it's irrelevant. It's a fixed cost and the price of the house. You amortize it over 30 years. It doesn't change. Your property taxes can go up and up and up. So I think we do need to keep the impact fee in there so that we can keep our millage rate low, because that's what's going to draw people here, is a low property tax. So I think we need to stay with the course. But I still go back to the bank thing. Every new home is going to go to a bank. If we put a bank closer by, where is that new trip coming from? I just can't.
It's from the additional couple hundred homes that'll come up in Falcon Trace and then down.
But we've already approved those, Bob. We know they're coming.
The additional ones that get built. We're looking at the trip rate is really looking at what is the mature facility going to have. And as growth occurs, the rate will increase. And let me just tell you, the trip length for banks is one of the shortest of the uses. It's only 2.4 miles is the trip length.
And some people go to more than one bank.
I don't have that problem.
Yeah, well,
And the people that come to Home Depot might have to go down to that bank.
Can I make one statement?
I don't think so.
There are some, in some of the other impact fees, you could break up, I'll be careful, a bunch of districts. If you think there's different areas, if you have a lot of 55 plus in the trip generation rate, there's all different ways you could refine, and there's nothing wrong with that, because as you have rates here, you have them by certain categories, and you have them for the whole county. In some areas they have different districts, and obviously that could help refine, and the surveys would have to be there to refine that for each one. I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying that helps someone.
I think you've got to be careful. You can spend a lot of money on consultants.
I was going to say.
Ones that don't live
I'm
here.
not recommending it, I'm just telling you how to
And,
refine it.
We already have that information.
We have Wesley.
Yeah, that's right. I can write that study.
verify that.
What I can do is,
I think I think we heard the commission loud and clear, and one of the concerns is they didn't want to increase impact fees. That's not everyone individually, but as a group, and that they wanted us to try and the majority. There you go. And they wanted us to try and reduce the commercial, like banks and anything, and manufacturing, so that we could bring people in.
yes, Will, can we do that? I mean, is that?
And that's what I think we have to ask our consultant. Can we legally do that, very similar to what the PASCO study did? And I think that would be one of the questions you want to ask the consultant. I'd also like to clarify, we have the lowest of counties. There's cities that have lower, but they don't, the counties, because cities don't have the same responsibility.
Well, I did say county.
I think there's a big problem lowering, if you have a methodology to determine trip lengths, lane miles, the cost of the roads, and you determine that a particular use generates so many trips, and this is what it's going to cost to serve those trips in terms of building roads. It's very dangerous to say, even though the data shows this is what it costs, we're going to give someone a break because we think that's a preferred development to, say, rooftops.
But can't we just create a study that says that if you have manufacturing, that yours impact fees are less because, in fact, you are paying sales tax on the product that you may be selling, and therefore we would get that extra 1 cent?
Well, I think you'd get that out of the credits on the impact fee formula. What you can do, you're authorized to expend public funds to attract and retain businesses. You can, it's considered a public purpose to spend money to develop local infrastructure and even to make grants to private enterprises to expand businesses. So I'd say you'd be better off not rejecting your study and charging one use the study rate and some other use in favor a lowered rate, but using your power to encourage economic development through a subsidy to the bank or the daycare or whatever it is you think is
I'm more of a
good
capitalist
business.
than that, I think. I would rather, I'd rather us get out of their way versus,
Well, then you get rid of impact fees entirely.
Okay.
And you
That
fund the
doesn't scare me.
infrastructure through bonding, probably.
If you can get rid of impact fees entirely, why can't you charge a smaller percentage? That's
You
my
can. You can charge a smaller percentage to everybody,
what you
and
can
that's
do.
what we've always done in the past. We've determined a fee and then set it about 85% of what we calculated as a discount. You could discount it to whatever lower percentage that you want.
But we'd have to do it all the way across the board?
Yes, I think if you're going to keep the fee, you got to keep its rationality.
Or change the methodology of how we got there to justify it?
Right.
Let's ask the consultant, have you ever done one where you did a different one for manufacturing, a different one for commercial than you did residential, as far as percentage?
Well, no, I think the, I agree with the county attorney. You have to have a methodology that
Okay.
applies to all the land uses. And, not that, some people haven't done studies. Marion County did a study. Studies could be done. I just think the base of that study is quite weak. I think it would be difficult to defend. I think you're risking, you might be risking a lawsuit. It might be difficult to defend. So it's not something I would, our firm would put our name on that study.
I'd like to ask Jason a question. Impact fees. What do we collect a year in impact fees? From the high to a low?
Depends on the year.
Yeah, I realize that. Well, let's suppose, a high year and a low year. What ballpark?
Our highest year at the boom times was about $32 million.
$32 million.
That was 2005.
Okay.
So that was halfway through our increase, or not?
That was traffic.
That was just traffic impact fees.
And
Okay.
Can I ask what year in 2005 we've raised our fees, if you don't mind, right along those lines?
Yeah.
What date in 2005
July 1st.
July 1st.
is whenever we raised them, and they went into effect when?
That's when they
Went into
July 1st is when they went into effect.
No fact.
August, September,
The
October.
year after that was probably the biggest.
Okay, so we had, it was the biggest what?
Was the biggest year for the.
So it wasn't 05, it was 06.
2005, 2006 would be
And
the.
that's just traffic impact fees, just for building roads.
That's traffic impact fees.
Okay, and that doesn't include the gas tax or the sales tax, correct?
Right.
So we're looking at about, well, you could still leave that out, which is $32 million. Okay, what would that do to our millage rate if that was tacked on to the ad valorem tax and we didn't have impact fees?
Oh, that would be substantial.
Yes, it would.
Just theoretically, it would be about 2 mils. Now our low, like now, it's about $2 million a year. So that would be
What happened to our millage rate this year, with it being 2 mils, or 2 million?
about a little over 1/10 of a mil. So it varies.
No, I mean, since the revenue that we're comparing revenue to millage rates, and the millage rate went down at the same time our revenue did, for impact fees.
But we've never used their millage for capital before.
That's right.
Yeah.
I know that. I'm just trying to put this in perspective, because we got to pay for it. It's not a matter of whether you want to pay for it or not. It's a matter of how do you want to pay for it. And that's the question. You can either pay for it with the property taxes, you can pay for it with fees, or you can pay with a combination of thereof.
Or sales tax.
Well, that's the sales tax or a fee, which is, fees or taxes.
I agree.
And then you need to decide if you want it out of this fee, this fee, this fee, this tax, this tax, this tax, or you want it all out of one or the other. And but when we have growth here, you're looking at substantial increases in property taxes if we aren't charging impact fees.
Any other questions? Wait, I'm going to open it up to the public. Just a minute. Any other questions up here? We'll start with you, Peter. Come to the podium, please, and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Peter Robinson. I'm with Laurel Homes. I just wanted to say that, yes, if you go back to 2005 and you use this 2 mil number, that's a real number. But if you go to today's number, which is 1/10 of a mil, that's a debate. You know, let's be honest. Duval County, which is not on your list, does not charge impact fees. And there's a reason they don't charge impact fees. Because they care about jobs. They care about their people working. And that's the real issue that we have to face. And the world has changed. You know, God knows. I mean, I don't know if you ever turn TV on today, but everything's melting down everywhere. And it was interesting when you had this map about where the bank was located, and you had to drive 4.5 miles. Well, remember there was the RBC Bank that was trying to build on the corner of 27th Avenue, which would reduce that dramatically, and the impact fees were so high, and then they said we had capacity on the road, that the roads were over capacity, that they wouldn't let them build for years. So we just made it more difficult. Then we have the issue of Barefoot Bay. You know, the Barefoot Bay people now come into our area and they do buy at our Home Depot, and we get their 1 cent sales tax.
That's right. Thank you.
And that's a huge benefit.
That's right.
And we get their gas tax, which used to go up to Brevard County. That's a huge benefit. And as a rule, I mean, even if the Home Depot wasn't there, those Barefoot Bay people came in and ate anyway. They already ate.
And Peter, that's a great point, but does that gas tax and sales tax, will that pay for widening US 1 to accommodate the increased trips?
50% of it.
It's just right over.
Okay, right, 50%. But we can't charge them impact fees.
As I remember the state.
Okay, we can't charge the Barefoot Bay people because they're not in our county.
Right. Yes,
so then we had to charge Home Depot the impact fees to make up the 50%.
But if we didn't have the Home Depot there, we wouldn't be getting their
We want to hear the public.
So we wouldn't have to widen US 1.
But as I remember, the widening of US 1 was paid for by the DOT. It wasn't even paid for by the county.
Well, yeah, I did miss that, Peter.
And there's another fact, too, that we had a reduction. Joe pointed out the other day that you're already seeing with these high gas situations, you're already seeing a 7% reduction on the roads in traffic. I mean, you go out there now without construction. One of the things that caused a lot of traffic in the old days was we had the hurricanes, and we had all those people traveling on the roads. Well, they're not there anymore. Those roads are empty. And then I would also point out, the one man pointed out that in Osceola County, you said they did a trip study, and it changed the numbers from 27.3 trips to 11.9 trips. We've never done a real trip study of our people here. If there was any place where I think we really need to do a study, and it's easy enough to do, we've got developments that are blocked off. You could, stick a trip counter on there and find out how many trips are really coming and going. We use a national number, which I think, when did that number come about? In the 50s, Bob? It's updated, but I can guarantee it isn't updated to $4 gas. I can tell you that. I know how these things work because we spend our time arguing with appraisers all the time. So those are just the issues that I would this has gotten to be a bigger problem. We need to look at it as a bigger problem and see if there's more solutions than just looking at the impact fee as our only way to get these funds. And it's a whole new world. And I would hope that we would take some time and really study what's actually happening in our county, because it's not just bad here, it's bad all over this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and I share your thoughts on how bad it is.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Hartman. I'm not a developer, I'm not a builder, I'm not a real estate person, I'm just a citizen. Mr. Wheeler said it, impact fees are taxes. The way they're structured now, the only person who gets a benefit out of the impact fee is the county.
No one else gets any benefit out of that. It's just an added cost to them. It's a negative incentive to do business. There's an alternative approach that can be done to cover the needs of the capital requirements over a period of time. And that's to somehow structure that impact fee into the property tax system. Maybe it goes on for 5 years or 6 years or 3 years or some period of time added to the final selling price of a unit. That way it's out of the profit structure and the cost basis of the unit that was being purchased. And this can be a significant change in the cost structure of that home or that business. And I don't see why something can't be done if you're not going to just build the total price, the total requirement capital into the property tax structure, that you can't do some kind on a total level playing field basis. If you want to charge new structures, new development, an incremental amount for the roads and whatever other services are required, somehow build it into the property tax structure. So it's out of the basic cost of the property.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
If I understand what you're saying, let's say it's a $10,000 impact fee. You're saying over a period of 10 years, part of the additional tax on that house would make up that $10,000?
Yes. And actually, you could do it on a future value basis so that you add, a return in there.
But they're doing that if they're making a payment and they finance that $10,000, they're still paying it out. They're paying it out either way.
Oh, but they're paying. Okay, I made an example. I'm not sure I want to go into it, but let's just say you have a $200,000 property and you have your impact fee is $15,000 on that property. Okay. The developer, I think I'm correct in this, the developer's now base cost of that property is $215,000. Now he adds his profit and overhead into there, which is 15 to 20%. Now he sells it. There's a real estate commission of 6 or 7% or something like that in there.
If I alternate, it's 10.
Pardon? Yeah, commercial, it could be 10. Yeah, for you it's 10. And now the closing closing time comes, and I've got all my closing costs involved, which is essentially a percentage of that selling price. So that $200,000 property, by the time I buy it, is like $260-some thousand. I can't remember. Yeah, $260-some thousand. If I did it the other way, that price to me would be about $15,000 less. That's how this thing gets incremented up. That $15,000 impact fee actually costs me, the purchaser, a lot more than that. Now, if I now have that as a property tax alternative, first of all, my initial cost is less. Then every year, my property tax is now deductible since we don't have a fair tax. My property tax is deductible on my federal taxes. So I'm winning. Everybody's winning on the deal.
What he's describing to me is a CDD. I mean, that's almost what he described was a community development district. And I know those give our county administrator heartburn.
To some degree.
What's that?
People love them after a few years.
Yeah, but that's what...
have a higher...
Well, I mean, I didn't come up with this myself. I saw this somewhere a number of years ago, and earlier there was a discussion about impact fees. But it sure makes sense to me to do that.
Yeah, I think it has merit. I'd like to know more about it, but I think it certainly has merit.
We have two podiums, so come on up if you have anything to say and would like us to hear. We'd be delighted to hear it.
Fred Mensing, 7580 129th Street in Sebastian. Since I've been here in 1980, we didn't have an impact fee. We have had impact fee changes over the years. The first failure of the impact fee is it runs off commercial development. They don't get a credit for it, and they have to come up with it up front. The same as the gentleman just pointed out. You go to build a house, it's an upfront cost. You wind up financing with a bank, so You do a 20-year mortgage, you know, $15,000 house, it's $30,000 that you wind up paying out. This was created by some genius at the Wharton School of Finance as a way to make governing bodies look good because they kept millage rate down on infrastructure. No fault of the five of you. You have attempted to work with and get industry here. But over the last 27 years, we've had commissions that had no desire for industry, did not make industry welcome. Now, to make industry welcome, you need to have incentives. When you tell the guy you got to put up, you know, $50,000 for an impact fee to build this or $20,000 to do that, you know, need to say, hey, we can help you this way and that way, the other way. We'll get you a low interest bond rate and so forth. And it's really time that you know, just got straight up about this. Maybe millage rate's going to have to go up for all of us. We need to make sure that our developers, and this is both industrial and residential, that the subdivisions they build, the infrastructure that they turn over to us as the taxpayers is built properly, you know, with quality materials, quality labor, and then assume the responsibility as taxpayers and move on. And as far as the issue, you talk about how growth happened. Florida was nothing until Flagler put the railroad down the East Coast and built the hotels. Then other things followed. Yes, once you have people here, then people have to have a job. And as you have places for jobs, you then get more people. It's a back and forth situation, you know, and we have one problem here in Florida. Every other part of the United States can manufacture something, and they've got many directions to send it domestically. Here in Florida, we've only got one way to send it, up the peninsula north, or else we have to export it, and that's a difficult situation. So we are at a disadvantage for industry. We need to do everything possible to make industry welcome, have it so that the labor force, that if it's not in an area, can afford to move into it. And if it's going to hit us with some real estate taxes down the line, and we're not going to have the lowest tax rate in the state, I think that maybe we would be better off to do it as taxes, and if need be, float a bond issue for some infrastructure to get it in place and pay it off with a tax issue, rather than continue anything to do with the impact fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alan Green. I live at 7756 99th Ave. And I also find it hard to take the economics of your decision out of it, because you're looking at the economics. I am the economics. I live and work here, always have. To echo Mr. Davis's sentiments and to borrow something from T. Boone Pickens, this debate misses the point. Right now, based on residential, you know, you can go back to the chicken and the egg, which draws which. I think eventually, once the seed gets planted, industry is going to follow rooftops. They're going to create some type of demand. But with that said, so I'm going to use residential numbers, seeing as how that's the theory I'm going to use that drive it. The residential building permits are down 40% from last year, 72% from a 6-year average, and 80% from a high point in 2004. You know, to that traffic of $30 million sounds great, but that is a number that is never going to exist in most of our lifetimes. That was 3,000 permits. The years before that were 1,200, 1,300, 1,400. That number will never exist. So to base anything on that is fantasy land. Yes, it is. You can shake your head all you want. That is fantasy. It's not going to happen again.
No, the only thing I'm saying is we grow at 2 or 3% a year, and 15 years ago 2% was this big. 3 years ago 2% was this big. Probably 10 or 15 years from now 2% is going to be that big. So you are going to keep increasing that number. They'll spread it over a larger group.
Right. You'll spread it over. Right. You'll spread it over a larger person. Or, you know, so the number should stay somewhat proportional, but you know, impact fees, yes, there are fixed costs on the house. On my entry-level house, They're over 8% of the cost. They are the single largest cost. They cost me more than concrete. They cost me more than trusses. They cost me more than bricks. It is the single largest cost of the house. And right now, houses are not appraising. I have people who have money, and house costs, if you look, I know my personal costs that I charge on houses have dropped $40,000 to $60,000 per house because I've passed on savings that I've got. Miranda, their starter houses went from 189 to 109. Builders are building them at and below cost. They're selling specs below cost. And because of shortfalls, because of foreclosures, they won't appraise. I have a customer right now that would like to build a house, but they can't get their house to appraise. So shifting it from commercial to residential, those few $1,000s right now make the difference. I mean, you're looking at last year 500 and something permits. So from residential impact fees, 549 permits from October 31st to August 8th. Well, with that, if you take the $10,000 breakdown, $10,124, we would have got about 2.8 million. We could build half a mile of roads with that. So are we going to sacrifice what little bit of industry is left for that half a mile of road? Or what was even more interesting is if the sextons have another 40 acres, we can pay them not to build anything on it. So that's the good news with those 500.
Got 4 votes. Ouch.
Marion County, which I know has come up quite a bit here with studies and so forth, they just did it was a 6 or 9 month impact fee holiday. They basically waived them, almost waived them, $4,000. And I can tell you the only 2 sales I had were because of that. It made the difference of whether they could buy the house or not. The debate should be, in high growth, yes, I agree with Mr. Wheeler, they may have to offset some of the initial, because I firmly believe over time that growth will eventually pay for itself and does pay for itself. And yes, in the short time, there are growing pains that have to be paid for, and there may be some amount that needs to be kicked in. But we're going backwards. Right now, the impact money is a very... It's a very unstable source of revenue. That's not where I would bank on getting money from. You can't use it to make up budget deficits. You can't use it to repair roads. You can only use it to expand it. And right now, you're not going to make enough to expand a road. To hire a police officer once you pay for his car and his badges and his insurance, and what little benefit that we're going to gain from the numbers that we're talking about right now, I don't think are going to offset the sacrifices we're making. And just one last point, when who should pay what, I guess you would have to look at the residential may demand that the commercial come in, and they should pay the bigger mortgage or bigger burden. Then the residential is also going to draw other people from other places. So, it also puts some of the money more evenly. In other words, whatever the store pays, they're going to charge in their prices, and everybody's going to pay a little more. So there's got to be some kind of balance there. I don't think you're ever going to shift all of it. You're just going to talk about who pays 40, who pays 60, who pays 50. But the whole point of the matter is right now, I agree with Mr. Davis, it should be, okay, maybe you don't get rid of them because it's too hard to reinstall them, but, don't have them for the next year. The number that we're talking about is the total impact fee, everything, $10,000, that's the one step up, and that's where most of what I build, so that's why I'm using the number. $10,000 for 549, that's $5.5 million. If Sexton would give half of our money back and let them build a house there, we could float for 2 years on those numbers. So
I think as one commissioner, I believe we need to comment on what you're saying about the Sexton property. One, that money's not available for this or impact fees or anything else. That was a self-imposed tax by the voters to be used specifically and only for that type of purchase.
Yes, and I know
and the
how
voters,
specific voters, specific interest groups get specific people to vote on it, but it's still a way that you spend our money.
this is America, and the people have a right to do that. But I don't want to argue with Mr. Green. It's just that I don't want the people to think that this is an option. We could have taken that $12 million and spent it over here. That was a bond passed by the voters to tax themselves. A committee set up, and people made recommendations, and it's totally separate from any other funding in this county.
And I'm looking
it's
at,
the only thing that money can be spent for.
And recreation and future monies. I can tell you that I wasn't asked about it, so I don't know what special interest group pushed it, but I can
You
tell you
had
I
an
would not have
opportunity to
voted
vote on it or against it. Either way, you had the opportunity to voice your vote.
Yeah, I know how government works, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. Joseph Paladin. I'm the president of Black Swan Consulting, and I live here in Vero Beach. A couple things. One thing I'd like to ask Bob, and I think I asked him this about a year or two ago. Bob, do we have enough money to pay for infrastructure?
No, we don't, and as a matter of fact, we're going through redoing our capital improvements element right now of our comp plan, which by state law we have to do every year. We've got, just for roads, we have about a 5-year capital improvement program, about $300 million, and we're not even close. Now, the good thing is demand's going down some, so we can stretch out some of the projects, and there isn't really the need to do them as quickly as possible. But to answer Mr. Paladin's question, no, we don't have enough money to build the infrastructure that we need.
So then, I guess to assume your answer to that problem, you would say that the impact fees aren't high enough.
Well, there are several ways that we can address this. One is making land use changes, and there's also an opportunity, if the board wants, they can lower levels of service and not provide as much infrastructure. But based on the levels of service we have and the demand out there, right now we're getting shortfalls.
All right. I'm not going to beat on that. Going back to what the discussion's been here, I agree with what everything's been said up here on the dais. But on the idea of commercial impact fees, we talked about this, I guess, close to 2 years ago, about putting a formula together that we could defend legally to lower commercial industrial impact fees. I take it we haven't got close to doing anything on that. No. Is there any
Well, I think
chance?
that's why we have these gentlemen here today, maybe background studies where we could see that the trips are shorter for commercial. I think that would help, and that's why we have these gentlemen here that do traffic, because traffic is the main concern. Also, there's other areas that we're required in our comp plan, and I think that we're probably going to we could lower our level of service and recreation, by not having such large acreage requirements in our comp plan and things like that. And that's why we're here today, is to discuss some of that, how we could help commercial.
Well, and the point I was going to make, with even the information we have here today, you have a scope, you have an area. Be very conservative, don't be very conservative. If we went to the far extreme compared to where we are at the other extreme of being very conservative on every option we had that would legally defend us in a formula to lower commercial industrial impact fees, that possibility hasn't been looked at. If we looked at that possibility, do you think that that would make a large difference in what we're trying to get you to do to justify us lowering commercial industrial impact fees? As far as recapturing trips, pass-by trips, detoured trips, things like that. Somebody?
I'm not sure your question.
Yeah, the only thing I could say is, again, when I go back to surveys, that you would have to do is to look if there are specific examples in the county where we would look at, there would be some surveys. We did it in Osceola County, we did it for daycares and banks, and they did it for those 2 land uses only because, again, of the funds.
And I understand the survey aspect, but without paying for surveys and going into the survey, we've made studies and gone by studies where we had different areas that we could go to as far as how far out we reach to count trips, how far out we do this, how many trips to recapture, what percentage of recapture. There's a percentage basis there where we could go plus and minus. We've always been very conservative because the pressure's been put on us to be very conservative. If we weren't very conservative in the commercial industrial aspect of it, could we lower that fee enough to justify our legal defense?
Yes. The answer to that is probably when he talks about the trips, how we got the 6 mile radius. I think it was over 2 years ago, the planning and zoning had us look at our how we calculate trips, how far we look out. All those go into the equation and obviously have an effect. And we could look at all those. But there's other tools in the toolbox as far as trying to help industry. Like Will Collins said, the commission could vote to waive it for specific industry. There's tax abatement. We could finance impact fees. There's other tools we could look at. I don't think anyone here on the staff would look forward to, or on the commission, increasing impact fees in this environment. Let me make that statement again. I don't think
not increasing impact fees in our economic environment is going to make a big difference right now. I think that what would make a big difference is to substantially reduce the impact fees in commercial industrial, or as maybe another way of looking at it, is would it be legally defensible if we had a moratorium on not charging impact fees on commercial industrial, period, for 12 months? Do we defend that, Will?
I don't think we could under the current system and methodology under which we've developed this set of impact fees, no.
You could, however, Will said, you could take it out of our general fund or pay through out of our own taxes legally if the board if the board wanted to do that. So we could subsidize it would be the only way, in your opinion, to legally defend that?
Correct.
Okay, but we couldn't legally defend that by not charging impact fees, period, on any commercial industrial development over the next 12 months was an incentive to bring business and industry in here, which would increase our impact fees overall by bringing people in here to buy some of these houses up that are sitting here dead empty. You couldn't justify that in a court of law.
Not unless you also did away with the impact fees on residential.
Could you, Madam Chair, could you do a refund of impact fees for targeted industry?
If they paid and you collected, that would be tantamount to a grant or a subsidy, so you probably could. You would have collected, they would have paid their fair share. You see some public purpose in giving an incentive to retain or attract industry. Yeah, you could probably do that.
What funding source could you use for that, Will?
I have no idea where the money would come from.
It would come from the impact fee they paid. They give it to us and we give it back.
Well, haven't we spent
I don't think we would have to take it out of the ad valorem tax. If we'd have to take it out of the general fund and pay the impact fee fund back, I think.
Right, these are all trust funds for the infrastructure. They're paid because people are going to get a benefit from infrastructure delivered. And if they don't get it delivered because you don't hold these funds in trust but you use them for another purpose, that wouldn't work.
It ends up being a shell game.
Yeah, I just heard that.
And getting back to the philosophy, if we did do something really drastic like not have impact fees charged on commercial industrial development for just a moratorium period of 12 months and see how that worked out with our income, with our various businesses coming in here, et cetera, who would we be worried about defending ourselves against? Anybody? You all going to sue us?
That's what they say now.
So who would we defend ourselves against? Who's the vigilante out there? Who's the bandit?
The only way I could answer is potentially you could have a residential builder sue us. Potentially, I don't know, and I'm not trying to be smart, but because we treated them unfairly. I think if we waive impact, if you were to do that, you'd be better to do away with them across the board. Not that I'm recommending that, both for both residential and commercial.
Well, I mean, that's some of my thought processes and just a philosophy that I keep hearing about being legally defensive. And people are going out of business right now because they have nobody to buy their homes, they have nobody moving here to have jobs. If we create an incentive, even if it's through a temporary moratorium period, to give people that incentive, people wouldn't pull permits maybe right away because everybody wants to see if the world's going to come to an end right now. As soon as they see that incentive, they say, listen, I got 12 months to pull a permit to build my business or to build my building. What the hell? I'm going to take a shot right now. So maybe, and then we're going to have to hire people. So maybe that whole thing kickstarts this thing to where we get this economy flowing and we start getting rid of these empty houses sitting out there. And I don't think that worrying about somebody suing us that lives here in the county is a very big threat, in my opinion. I'd just like to have that looked at.
We could look at one thing, we could look at a way of deferring them would be to finance them. I mean, we could finance the impact fees, and that would be a way of deferring them for commercial only, where we would say there's 3 years. And now, it has risk, and I don't know how it would go over publicly, but that's an option. If we're truly interested in looking at industry too, and Commissioner O'Brien has asked staff to look into it, is also tax abatement would help also. And we all need to get behind that if we try and get it passed by the public.
I mean, but, you know, would that be something that maybe the commission would find favorable? They didn't fear the legality of being sued in court by people.
When you ask who, there were clearly, on the campaign trail, there were clearly people in favor of raising the impact fees. Now, they're probably not sitting out here right now.
I'm not against raising impact fees on residential development if our formula indicates that we can justify
you just asked, Mr. Powell, you asked who would sue.
Right.
And it could be any individual out there who disagreed with that decision.
Well, and I understand that.
Now, with that being said, is it probably a good idea to consider right now reducing them or looking into that? I think so.
And I think that even the people out there that you're talking about have made several statements in the past, publicly and privately, that they weren't against commercial industrial development. They weren't against that type of growth. Matter of fact, they were very much in favor of it. And they would favor a lowering of impact fees on commercial industrial development. I'm not speaking for those people, of course, but I've heard them say it. So, again, the biggest fear we have, I don't think is there, but I think this would really kickstart our dead economy right now. If somebody's looking to build a business anytime in the near future, they damn sure get it off the ground now. Or if they're looking to build a business on the borderline in Brevard County or our county or St. Lucie or our county, maybe they build a business in our county. And that'd be one way of getting this thing started. It's just a thought process, and I think we ought to really seriously think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to have our break for captioning.
Real quick, Mr. Paladin, one of the things like I keep mentioning is we could reduce both residential and commercial. We presently collect about 85%. You could go to 75%, and that would be another way to do it. And do it for across the board. I think that would work. That's a fair way if you're going to try something like that. More defensible, I think.
Thank you. We'll take a 10-minute break.
It ain't, yeah.
If we could come back to order, please.
I don't think I'm participating.
Where'd our consultants go? Did they go home?
Actually, one did go home. I knew he had to leave at 4 to catch a plane, but the others are here.
Okay. Well, if there's anyone in the audience that has a question or wants to say anything pertaining to the report our consultant gave us, so that the other consultant can go home, are they on the hour? Are they on the tab?
Yeah, I'm Richard Bialowski, Reef Road, Indian River County. I'm curious if any of you can see any foreign countries from your house.
Oh, don't go there.
Someone brought up the notion of giving us, having a 1-year moratorium on fees on commercial development. And then we heard it, somebody kind of said here in the audience, let's have it on everything. And actually there was a bit of an uprising here in favor of that. I would like to formally propose that you consider that, because the fact is things are so bad right now that I'm not sure that a blanket moratorium on impact fees would even have an impact on anything. I'm not sure that it's very easy to finance much of anything right now in the current situation. So, probably, well, let's not say probably, there's a darn good chance that having a moratorium on all impact fees will be totally neutral, because nothing will happen, and if nothing will happen with a moratorium, you can bet it wouldn't have happened without it. These are the times when you have to do things that you maybe don't want to do. I hate to, it's a heavy mantle to be a prophet, but when we had one of the first meetings about a potential moratorium, I remember saying that, just sit tight. One of these days, instead of a moratorium, we'll have a recession. And then instead of talking about all the things we have to do to slow things down, we'll have a conversation about what we need to do to try to stimulate things. And I have to say, when I said that, I really had no sense that we would be heading for where we're heading. Big spender that I am, I took my wife out to dinner Saturday night a couple weeks ago. At 8 o'clock on Saturday, I walked into a restaurant. There was one other couple in a very nice restaurant with very good food. I mean, I think everybody's hurting. I have a next door neighbor who is a restaurateur, another restaurant. He said to me, nobody's going into restaurants. I'm stupid enough, I just finished building a new house. Nobody told me we were going to be where we are. So I got to go out and buy some new towels and, new this, new that. I'm the only guy going into Home Depot buying the new things because he's got a new house. I mean, this is hurting everybody everywhere. It's very deep. Truthfully, y'all watch TV, we all watch TV. It's very scary. Nobody really has a solution. I don't think it's going to hurt anything if we try to perk things up and try to incentivize things with an across-the-board moratorium on these fees for 1 year. Let's come back. Let's talk about it in a year from now. Let's hope in a year from now we don't have the same problem. We can remove the moratorium and we move forward. But I would really suggest you think seriously about that, because these are really very, very scary times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard, can I ask you something? Just one of the ways to get this thing started is to start buying local-made stuff. Okay, and I don't know when you just built your new house if you bought the cabinets and molding and countertops at Home Depot or not, but we got businesses here in the county that make those things, and if we can get you and the other builders and everybody else in this town, because Home Depot doesn't sell a darn thing made in this county. Okay, it all goes up to North Carolina, and then from there it goes elsewhere. So if we can get people to start buying stuff from the local tile companies, the local cabinet makers, the local counter makers, the local molding and trim maker guy, that's how we turn this around, is we start spending the money here locally and not sending it out of the county.
Well, I agree with you. Although, Peter, you probably ought to be talking to Will about whether, as a commissioner, you can get up here and kind of propose a boycott of the national merchandiser to the community. But I agree with you. I mean, we try to work with local merchants, and we have a very small local cabinet shop that's doing an unbelievable set of cabinets for us right now. But, you know, they're not getting them done because they barely have enough work to keep going. So, you know, half the time, one of the partners had to move out of his house because it foreclosed on his house. He had to move his family to Pensacola, and he was gone for a week, and we didn't get the cabinets done because he was gone. I mean, these things are really very personal and very close. I agree completely that we ought to be all looking to our local business community to be generating whatever we can. We ought to be, you know, sustainability is an interesting word. I mean, there's some big Brundtland Commission definition of what it means about future generations, but the real simple definition is that something that isn't sustainable means it can't be sustained and it dies. And we got to do something to be sustainable here. And local businesses, but you got to be building something to go to local business. I'm all for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Good afternoon. Don Wright from Sebastian. I'm a local realtor. I served on the Impact Fee Committee and have sat through most of these meetings. And actually, I want to compliment all of you, because I think the level of understanding and knowledge on impact fees, how they're calculated, what they're all about, has increased remarkably in the last year. Not only for the people in the audience, but for everybody involved. I think that some really good points are made today that need to be taken into consideration. One, we still need to get it right for Indian River County. Measuring trips based on national averages, doing a lot of the things I'm hearing that everybody is concerned about. Now, rather than spending the money on a consultant redoing his report, maybe spend some money to get Indian River County numbers, to get the numbers right for this county. Take a year to do it. The thought of putting a moratorium on impact fees, might upset some people, but what are our impact fees for traffic for the next 12 months? A couple of $1 million, and we have a $300 million work schedule, so we either got to increase the fee 150 times or collect it over the next 150 years. I just don't think that's going to work properly. What would it say to anybody who was thinking of bringing a business into this community or building a house in this community if it was well-known, advertised, Indian River County had no impact fees? But take a year, eliminate the impact fees, take a year to study them, get them right, and then come back when the economy is improved. Unemployment, 9%, 9.2% right now. News this morning, housing starts nationally are at the lowest level in 17 years. Financial markets and Wall Street are in probably the biggest crisis since the Depression. I mean, you can't avoid the reality of the economic times that we're in. So I think some bold steps are needed, but they need to be followed up with specific action. And I think everybody now understands the impact fees a heck of a lot better, but we still don't have them exactly right for Indian River County, and I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Next.
Can I ask Bob a question while he's coming up? Bob, in the last several months, on most of the building permits that have been pulled, and I'm talking homes, residential, where have they come from?
A lot of them have been national builders.
That's right.
We've still got Centex, Lennar, Devasta.
And quite frankly, they're the groups that have created this situation nationwide, along with the mortgage companies.
Hi, I'm Bruce Smith. I'm a local builder here in town. Like everybody, I've been listening to the news a lot lately. And this week alone, I think I've heard 3 times a nationally known economist say that the whole economic climate of the world is not going to change until America's housing product or America's housing problems are solved. And I don't know how that relates, except that it's a bigger picture than that we all seem to see. And I know, working with so many people out there, the regular people, I got to tell you the truth, they don't feel like y'all have an idea what's going on out there. Exactly right. They really don't. They really feel like nobody knows how bad it really is out there, and I hear it every day. I haven't had the opportunity to turn in too many bids lately, but when I have, when I'm explaining, my bid process, every time I get to the impact fee, and chairs slide away from the table, people get upset. I just did it the other night, and their comment to me was, we don't have to live in Indian River County. With my job, I can live anywhere in Central Florida. And I never got an answer out of them. So it's a big deal, and I think if we can get the money anywhere else but impact fees, I think construction and home building carries this county a lot more than people realize. It's not a trickle down from construction. I think it's a major flow down. Every little restaurant, every haircut shop, everybody's hurting. And until construction can get back on its feet, it's going to continue that way. And so I think we've got to do whatever we can to get it moving. People are going to be moving away. There's not going to be houses bought. And then, like what Mr. O'Brien said about buying locally. I'm sorry, I pushed a button here that shouldn't have. But the local builders buy locally. We buy from people like East Coast Lumber and all the local suppliers, the local people that live in this area. But these big guys, they don't buy from anybody local. They don't hire any local laborers. I mean, I've talked to because I've been, really interested in this since we slowed down and since they came in. I've talked to every subcontractor that works for me, every single one. Said, have you ever done any work for any of those big subdivisions? Every single one of them says, no, never have I been approached. And if I have been approached, they give me the price and say, you don't bid our jobs, you just decide whether you can do it for this. And then you go out to 95 in the morning and you see them flowing in. When they were building, they were coming from Orlando, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, but no local builder, no local labor, and they're also not buying from anybody local. And so that's a big problem when they come in here and then just bring everything from outside, and we don't see a thing for it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, anyone else?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kirk Sorensen. I represent the Treasure Coast Builders with their impact fee issues. There's no question that impact fees is far from a perfect science, and many of the issues discussed today, I think, effectively address the fact that they're too high and the local economy perhaps can't support them. It's true that when you do calculate a fee, this is what it typically costs to accommodate new development. If you discount that fee by a percentage, whether it's 50 or 25%, it doesn't affect the cost of the infrastructure. whether it's coming from impact fees or from ad valorem or gas taxes or sales taxes. I think the real focus, as opposed to taking a broad-based arbitrary discount, is ensuring that the report is accurate. Taking a look at the components within the report, and many of these issues, as you probably recall, were discussed last time relative to the lane mile costs and relative to the trip length information that was used in the Duncan study. If these issues were really focused on from a component perspective, the fees would drop, and the fees would be legally defensible, and you could charge new development 100% of the fee. There have been local studies in South Florida relative to trip length. In fact, one conducted by Dr. Nicholas, I think, who helped prepare this study, which actually reduced the trip length for non-residential land uses by up to 50%. In Martin County, that reduced all non-residential impact fees by 50%, more or less, depending on the land use. Now, you can achieve those objectives, I think, without arbitrarily adjusting the fees downward, by focusing on the data, getting the data correct. That way you would also preserve your integrity and preserve the legalities of the fees. So, my recommendation is to look at the components in the fees. In addition, the state is offering, and I'm sure you probably are aware, incentives to reduce fees. So they recognize the importance of reducing impact fees. By providing $20 million to counties that roll back their fees by 25%, for use towards affordable housing is a tremendous incentive, I think, that counties really should take advantage of. Right now, throughout the entire state, there's only one other county utilizing that mechanism to get affordable housing funds. So that's an incentive that you can apply towards, yet at the same time help your local economy by rolling back the fees to where they really should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we need to wrap up. Thank you, consultants. Do you have any last moment inspiration for us?
No, ma'am. I think we've gone over everything. Again, I hope we explained some things. I think we probably caused some more questions. But again, if there are specific, I do not endorse having a total survey of everything, but I do suggest if there are certain areas, if you want to accomplish on industry or commercial, like in Osceola County, they took 2 uses just because of cost and looked at those uses. And if that's something that you want to look at here as an incentive to help help people, and if you want to look at industry, for example, certain industries, then that would be something to lower the trip length, to lower those rates.
Thank you. Will, do you have anything to add to any of this?
Just that you wanted to address the special call meeting.
Yes, thank you. I did. Did you bring your calendars?
I've got to turn it on.
Okay. What looks like a date that we might be able to schedule this special call meeting?
We'll do it Saturday night after the Gator game.
In the daytime.
Start with Friday.
What about the 29th?
Of September? Mine's slow. Give me just a minute, Madam Chair. I'm good. Wait, y'all, if y'all are available, I'm
Which is a Monday, 29th?
Is that, I can do that. Guess. It'll take it a minute to get warmed up.
Yeah.
I think so. It looks good.
Okay. Okay, we have 4. What about you, Gary? We want you here.
No, the 6th, I could do it.
You could do it the 6th, which is a Monday? The next
It's a Monday, that's the following Monday.
How far is that going to move this process along? Don't we have a time constraint?
Can you do that?
We really need to get this moving. We need to get the LDRs drafted. We need to get them to PSAC, then P&Z, and then the board, and we've got the
Okay, what is your time
moratorium.
frame? What is the last date we can
Push
do
on
it?
the envelope.
We're there already, aren't we, Bob?
Yeah, we need to do it by next week.
Can we look at this Friday, Madam Chair?
Okay, what about tomorrow?
Or tomorrow's Wednesday. Thursday.
Friday. What about Friday?
Friday I have a regional planning council.
That's right, and you have Wednesday.
I've got something.
Well, maybe some people have to change their plans.
Monday.
1 second. This,
Second?
well, the chambers are
They're not available.
That's
Yeah, I have the
correct.
chambers.
You have the Value Adjustment Board.
The chambers,
Who's in here?
Code Enforcement Board.
At night?
Afternoon.
What about Monday AM?
Monday, they're in here from 1 to 5:30. What about in the morning?
Fine.
That'd be the 22nd?
Yes. Gary, can you be here?
Nope.
Where are you going to be?
I'm going to be out of town.
On a holiday?
A holiday.
22nd. How bad is our meeting on Tuesday?
We've got Liberty Park.
That's a cakewalk compared to last yesterday.
Speak for yourself.
Why don't we just schedule it immediately upon concluding Tuesday's
Well, he ain't
meeting?
going to be here. He ain't going to be here. I think we need I think we have put a lot of time, energy, and effort on this. I want a full council here. When can you be here? We'll work on your schedule. When can you be here?
The 6th?
Can you make that work?
We'll make it work.
No, you know what, I don't see a problem with this, with all 5 of us being here. First, it's not a public hearing, it's a workshop. You're going to.
No, but I think, I want a full council here. It's a special call meeting, and we will make if you're going to be out of town on a holiday, we're going to make this work for you.
Okay, fine, I appreciate it.
We make a vote.
Yeah.
Special call meeting.
It's a special call. We won't be able to say, yes, I like it, no, I don't, right.
Yeah, we are.
That's this.
So that's the earliest you can be here?
Yep.
Can you make that work?
We can do it.
What was the date? The 6th, Monday the 6th.
When are you leaving?
Wow.
Can you, wait a couple hours? Don't you drive all night?
Flying.
You're flying. Boy, big trip. Okay, Monday. Is that okay? We'll let you know. I'm not sure exactly.
Let's tentatively do it for Monday, and if y'all go back and you look at your calendar and you find that it's just not pragmatic, then
Monday, that's Monday?
No.
The October the 6th.
October 6th.
And so, I mean, if it's
No, we're just going to start actually drafting the LDRs for some of the 38 changes. But we just got to get
You'll
it
just
going.
have to be in position
Right.
either way.
okay.
We'll do that.
Is this a morning meeting?
Well, we haven't set the time. It is going to be the
I
6th.
believe there was a request for evening.
No, that was for the
We're not, this is
that
a
was the
morning.
final hearing.
This is a daytime meeting.
Okay.
One thing on impact fees, if we're through with the meeting, let me just tell you, as Joe mentioned, staff's feeling is that the current study that we have right now and the proposed new rates are stale. It's the data is too old now, and given state law that requires the most recent data available, we feel that even if the board wanted to, that it's not doable to look at that. So that being the case, we would like to come back to you with some minor changes that we talked about, some level of service changes, and a few other things related to impact fees. But our position is we can't impose the new rates now, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
And if you would like to look at studies for some of the land uses, each land use would need to be looked at separately, and I think the cost that you gave us, Scott, was, do you remember?
Putting him in a
But you can think about that, and if you want to, you can
Yeah,
get
could you
back
have
to us.
Scott get that number to you, and then when you come back, we'll have it to look at. Okay. Well, thank you for coming.
Yes.
Were you the one from Texas? Oh, he left.
He's on the
Okay.
He's on the plane already.
You're out of Orlando?
You're just down the road.
Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. And everybody else as well.
Yes. Seeing no business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.